the presentation to Scott Stauffer, who is Scale Matters CEO and founder, and he's going to introduce the agenda and our speakers today. Scott?
Thanks, Dan. So before we hop into the agenda, just want to talk a little bit about the theme of bridging the gap between finance and go-to-market, which this four-part webinar series is about. And we've chosen this theme of driving better alignment between finance and go-to-market, really because the investor world has mandated that companies achieve efficient and predictable growth, which is a big change from where they were a few years ago. And people understand that in order to do that, two things need to happen. One, you need tight alignment between sales, marketing, and customer success, to ensure that their activities and their investments are building on each other and not working against each other. But you also need high confidence insights based on comprehensive data foundation to tell you exactly what's working, what's not, why behind it, and the impact of potential actions you might take to improve things. If all this sounds familiar, it should, because this is really the goals of the RevOps concept. And RevOps is supposed to drive efficiency and predictability really through two different pillars. One is the technology pillar, and this is what most people think of when they think of RevOps, is basically all of the tech that's implemented to automate activities done by sellers or marketers or CS staff. The people with the expertise in this pillar, this tech pillar, they have skills that are very traditionally similar to IT folks. It's just that they narrowly focus this expertise around go-to-market technology. The second pillar from which RevOps is supposed to drive efficiency and predictability is what we call the data pillar. And that's where modeling and data analytics comes into play. And the folks that have the expertise with these skills are very traditionally similar to the skills you find in FP&A, except that they also understand, have deep understanding of go-to-market nuances. And what we've seen, generally speaking, is this whole data pillar aspect, the plant modeling and analytics of RevOps, hasn't really materialized like it was expected to, especially in growth and mid-market B2B companies. And we'd argue that this is because the skill sets required here are not typically within the domain of most traditional revenue function leaders. And this is where we think finance shines, and that there's a real opportunity for finance to accelerate sort of the manifestation of the RevOps data pillar to drive efficiency. And annual planning, why we've chosen this particular topic for the first one, besides the timing of the year, but annual planning really is sort of the low-hanging fruit where finance can work closely with the go-to-market functional leaders to create a plan that leads to greater efficiency and predictability. So with that said, let's talk about the agenda. First of all, I'm joined by my colleague Michael Lee, who is our head of data and analyst services here at Scale Matters. What we're going to do today is start by talking about the role of a go-to-market bookings plan within the broader context of an annual operating plan, or AOP. Then we'll talk about kind of what's required. What are the elements that you need to have a sufficiently detailed bookings plan, and how do you go about building that? And then we'll show some examples. Michael will get into some real examples of what a useful plan looks like. And we'll end by talking about the benefits of planning at the level that we're purporting that you should do, and how that becomes a legitimate leadership tool to improve efficiency and predictability. So let's go to the next slide. And I'm just barreling through this because we have a lot to pack into 30 minutes, and I want to make sure there's time left for questions. And should we run over a little bit, we'll stay on our end if anybody has questions. So annual operating plan really has two primary components: the expense component, which we often call the budget, and the revenue component, which when done right is fed from the go-to-market plan, or what we'll often call the bookings plan. And for most growth and mid-market B2B companies, the comprehensiveness of the annual operating plan is sort of asymmetric, very deep and detailed on the expense side, but not so much on the revenue side. So let's talk about the expense side. The expense component lays out in some detail exactly where money would be spent kind of for each expense account, for each department or cost center. This is a detailed spend plan, right? And then actual expenses are tracked at that same level of detail to be able to perform variance analysis, compare actual versus budgeted expenses, et cetera. This is, I guess it's basically impossible to see, so I apologize for that, but this is really an example of a departmental expense budget for a relatively early stage company, where it identifies kind of line item expenses for each employee, right? Salary, bonus, fringe benefits, costs for contractors, then the non-talent expenses, such as office supplies, rent, T&E, and that sort of stuff. These budgets guide the functional leaders on exactly where and how they are expected to invest the company funds. By contrast, and if we go to the next slide, by contrast, the bookings plan is typically just a dissection of lofty annual goals into monthly or quarterly sub-goals, and then an allocation of those goals across the different departments within the go-to-market function. Typically looks something like this. Based on this bookings goal, annual bookings goal we have of $6 million, and an assumed 75-day sales cycle, and we think we need 4x pipeline coverage because we think we win about 25% of our deals. That means we need to generate this much pipeline in each of these quarters. And we're going to assume, because it feels like it's what it normally is, that marketing is responsible for a little bit over half of that, sales for about 40%, a little north of 40%, and that the balance will be generated by partners, though we do expect partner contribution to grow throughout the year. Furthermore, we're going to assume a 95% net dollar retention on existing business, and that's the responsibility of CS. This type of top-down bookings plan, it's not really even a plan, right? It's just an allocation of goals. But it's insufficiently detailed to force and codify operating assumptions around how the revenue is actually going to be achieved. So like, what are the marketing channels that will generate the pipeline? What type of ROI do we need on those channels? And how does that compare to kind of current performance? Consequently, the painful surprises that all too many companies feel are almost always on the revenue side and not the expense side. In fact, if you go to the next slide, Dan, our friends at GTM Partners did some research that shows that 56% of respondents missing their revenue goals. And of course, misses on the top line are often correlated with even bigger misses in EBITDA, because companies are often too slow to react to changing realities. So our goal today is to share an approach that we have successfully used across countless of our customers to build detailed bookings plans that codify operating assumptions and tightly align with the expense plan. And while these detailed plans aren't going to guarantee that lofty goals are going to be achieved, they do serve as a tool that enables leadership to move much more quickly and change course with a level of precision that isn't really possible with higher level plans. So let's talk about what the makeup of a good plan is. There's really 4 pillars that come together to make a sufficiently useful bookings plan. First and foremost, the plan must be built on a full funnel context. A plan that starts at, say, pipeline and ignores how top of funnel investments translate into pipeline and revenue isn't really helpful. It leaves too much to guesswork. In most companies, we see funnel conversion dynamics differ significantly across different sourcing channels, as well as across different customer segments. So if you are a business that uses multiple channels or strategies to source prospective customers, and or you have, clearly different target ICP verticals or geographies, et cetera, then your plan must account for this by building funnels for each channel for each segment. It's critical that the plan document assumptions so that when you compare actual performance against plan, you can actually look back and make a judgment about whether the underlying assumption was off or it's just an execution issue. And understanding that actually helps leaders to determine what their future course of action is. And finally, for your annual operating plan to have any integrity, the bookings plan must be tied back to the related investments. For example, if you're building a model for the paid search funnel, a primary input to that model is the expense budget for how much money, the media spend, if you will, that you're going to put forth on paid search. So let's talk briefly, and then we'll get to this more later. Let's talk briefly about the benefits of doing the type of plan we're going to show you. There's really three main benefits planning at this level. And we're going to get into more detail, as I said. But at a high level, detailed bookings plans provide kind of a legitimate sanity check, right? In terms of the achievability of goals, but also if there is sufficient resource allocated to execute the plan. Secondly, these plans are essentially models, right? We use the term plan, but really what they are is models. And if the models are done well, so as to really reflect your go-to-market motions, they become a very powerful tool to do what-if scenario planning. And finally, with detailed planning, you can do detailed variance analysis when you're actually evaluating actual performance. And we have found that being able to do variance analysis at a very granular level really helps to rapidly and precisely identify where problems are, and in many cases, the root cause behind them. So before I hand it over to Michael, I just want to talk a little bit about what we call full funnel fundamentals. Let's do a little primer on funnels before we get deep. So a funnel is simply a way to model the process of generating a lead and turning that lead into a customer. And a bookings plan done right is a comprehensive model of how a business is going to generate bookings that translate into revenue. If we look a little deeper on this slide, what we're showing is a very simple funnel. It starts with a set of investments that should yield some number of leads. This is the very top of funnel, or TOFU is the abbreviation we use. We then go through some process, right? The leads are generated. We go through some process to get an initial discovery or qualification call with those leads. So we're trying to get a first meeting scheduled, right? And this is often done by an SDR or a salesperson. Dan, can you put that slide back up? There we go. So that process of getting the first meeting scheduled is often done by a salesperson or SDR, and that the time that they spend is really that middle of funnel investment. And of course, at this stage, there's some fallout, as we certainly know that not all the leads that came in will end up in first calls with discovery calls. And this is where TOFU, or top of funnel conversion rate metrics, come into play. Similarly, once we've had the discovery call, we'll need to decide, okay, does that lead represent a legitimate sales opportunity right now? In which case, we're going to convert that lead to a qualified pipeline opportunity. This conversion point is modeled as the MOFU conversion rate, which reflects middle of funnel. And finally, the bottom of funnel, or BOFU, represents the process of converting pipeline opportunities into closed-won customers or deals. That BOFU conversion rate is what most of us think of as win rate. And the investments at this point are primarily the time from the sales team to move qualified prospects through the sales process or the buying process and turn them into customers. Then deal count times the average sales price, that ends up with the total bookings dollars. So you can see in this model, there are three elements. There are investments, there are volume metrics, such as number of leads and number of deals, number of dollars, and there are conversion rate metrics. Now, we've referred to this as an oversimplified funnel because it ignores the element of time. It assumes that all steps in this process happen simultaneously. And while there are certainly some kind of high velocity businesses that do one call closes where this model is probably adequate, for the majority of businesses, it isn't. So let's go to the next slide. For those businesses that don't have a one-call close. It is critical that the funnel model take time into account. And this is a visual depiction of a funnel model that includes cycle times for the top of funnel, the middle of funnel, and the bottom of funnel processes. This level of modeling is important because it helps leaders understand what needs to happen now at the top of funnel to lead to a bookings sometime in the future. And getting this level of modeling right is what really leads to improved predictability. So now I'm going to turn it over to Michael, and he'll walk you through kind of the process of building a plan and show you some examples of what we're talking about when we talk about these full funnel models.
Thanks, Scott. Let me just grab the screen share. Sorry, folks. I have a bit of a cold and fever, so if my voice gets out, I apologize. But as Scott alluded to, I'm going to show you kind of a view of kind of an Excel model to see how all of our volumetric and conversion rates and conversion time kind of figures flow together. As you can see in this piece, we have a few different channels in this example: paid search, organic, AE prospecting, and partner referral. That's going to flow down to the bottom, kind of total, bookings, things like that. For each of them, they're going to be very similar towards the middle and bottom, where we have kind of the middle, kind of meetings held, meetings booked. If we take a look over here, right? And then meetings set, meetings held, pipeline created, and close won deals. But each of them are going to be unique on the top of funnel for how much we're spending, or how much is converting from kind of direct web, or how many outbound activities are happening, right? For us, the way that this flows is kind of you start with building a top-down model and saying, okay, well, let's start with how much we're going to spend in terms of, in this case, paid search, agents fees, and media spend. How's that going to convert? We break our leads into low intent leads, so depending on the intent that the prospect shows, and high intent leads, right? These will convert at very different rates and days, and then that'll lead to your totals meeting set, right? And this is the initial qualification meeting that your team will go through to identify whether or not they're qualified or not, typically kind of that SQL process. That flows down then to meetings held, pipeline opportunities, and close won deals, okay? The reason we find it useful to plan at this level is because you can assign various pieces of this funnel to your various teams, right? So for example, the top part, right, this is going to be your marketing team, right, that is in charge of paid search. The middle part may be SDRs or maybe AEs for meetings set and meetings held. And obviously the AEs will going to be on the pipeline opportunity piece, okay? I think a worthwhile piece to mention here, right? Or maybe let me start with the poll first, actually. Can I ask for those of you, and Dan, maybe you can help me out with this, how many of you guys are planning at this level today?
So I just submitted the poll.
Let me just give a few more seconds for folks to fill this out.
So we can wait just a couple more minutes. We've got a bunch of votes coming in. It looks like, so what level of detail do you build your plans? High level without much detail to support our goals, very detailed, somewhere in between, we really don't plan at all. Those are the four options. It looks like somewhere in between is the leader, followed closely by high level, not much detail to support our plans and goals. And then coming in third place is very detailed, just like this webinar is recommending. So appreciate everyone responding. It looks like we're somewhere in between is the leader.
Great. So then I suppose for the folks that aren't already planning at this level, my guess is as you're going through the year, right, questions may arise when, especially if you start to miss goal. Questions such as, okay, well, why are bookings lower than expected? Oftentimes, as an example, people may say, okay, well, pipe gen is lower than expected, and it's coming from marketing. Pipe gen isn't hitting goal, basically, right? I think the challenge of that then the request is simply, okay, well, marketing, go generate more leads, or marketing, go generate more pipeline, or sales, go generate some to make up for it, right? It's at a very high level, similar to kind of that high level view that Scott showed a few slides earlier. But what I think we want to be able to do is be able to look at on a channel by channel basis, kind of what specifically is really holding us back, right? Is it going to be that we're not generating as many leads, or are we not generating enough meetings, right? Or is the conversion from lead to meeting set, is that where we're missing things, right? And then that'll help us figure out, okay, well, lead quality, is that the issue? Or if it's further down the line for meetings held to pipeline created, then that's a different issue that we need to address, right? Similarly, you could have marketing generating enough pipeline, sales generating enough pipeline, but bookings still coming in low. You can you make the correct kind of result or response that our win rate is down, but that's not necessarily a very compelling piece to fix, right? You can just say to the sales team, hey, get your win rates up, right? Maybe you can look at some win-loss reasons if you have that tracked. But for us, right, we can also help you see what is the stage-to-stage conversions, right, within your opportunity. So after it's been created to pipeline, what is the conversion from stage 2 to stage 3 to 3, 4 to 4 to 5, right? And then help you figure out, okay, is there an adjustment there that can be made for a specific stage in terms of what the team is doing or how they're pitching, or kind of narrow down on the issues a little more, right? I think for the folks who do plan at this level, kind of an open question or another poll to you guys would be, do you have your actuals in this level of detail, right? Because if you're going to plan this level, you want to be able to have your actuals at this level of detail. Otherwise, you still can plan at this level, but you're going to be making a lot of assumptions. And then as you go through the year, you're not going to be able to necessarily do a really tight BBA and pinpoint what is going wrong or right.
So I just launched the poll. What level of detail can you see your actuals? Yes, we can compare actuals versus plan in great detail. Option 2 is we can see high level actuals versus plan, but not details. And then option 3 is no, which doesn't make sense. Basically, not much detail is option 3. So far it looks like yes, we can compare actuals versus plan in great detail is neck and neck with we can see high level actuals versus plan, but not the details. So
Okay.
a bit of a mix there, Michael.
Yep, that makes sense. So then let me push over to this bottoms up assumption sheet. This sheet is formatted very similar to the actual model with all of the various kind of conversions, right? And all of the volumetric kind of results. But I did remove, let me just expand one of them. I removed all the volumetric stuff, right? And just have the conversions and assumptions. And what we did here is basically said, okay, for each quarter in 2025, how much do we want to say of an improvement do we want on top of 2024, right? So generally, right, for your top-down plan, your CEO and board may come to you and say, we're going to, seek to achieve 20% growth, right, in terms of new bookings. Let's just leave it at that. And then you have to figure out how, right? It's always a challenge to break that 20% up amongst, various groups or teams or initiatives and try to get tight around what exactly each thing is going to generate. By planning at this level, we make that a little easier, or a lot easier, honestly, because we can say, okay, each of these things, how much do we want to, adjust it by? And we can have marginal adjustments that, don't make your teams go crazy. They don't make them lose faith, kind of that we can achieve these things. So in this case, what I did is just for each of the quarters, right? I said for every single kind of conversion, we're simply going to increase by 2%. Right, in the first quarter, 4% in the second quarter, and 6% and 8% in third and fourth, right? These are not cumulative upon each other. It's just compared to 2024, okay? And what that yields us, right, if we make these kind of 2, 4, 6, 8% kind of improvements on every single kind of conversion that we have in this detailed plan, then ultimately this is kind of where we end up for total company bookings, right, on a quarterly basis. And you can see, right, you're able to get outsized returns and like exactly these type of returns that you want to be able to show and present and produce by chunking it down into smaller, more digestible bites that can be assigned out to specific teams, individuals, that they can be used as true goals and metrics when running kind of individual performance reviews or kind of team-wide KPIs and things like that, right? So I think this is an important kind of piece, is being able to plan at this level so that you can kind of chunk up the goaling, right? But then also to be able to show your actuals and measure your actual results at this level to determine where you are or not having success and where you are or not hitting goal, right? In a very kind of precise and tactile way. So with that, let me stop the screen share. And I'll hand it over back to you, Scott.
Okay. Dan, can you put back the what a plan enables slide? So I want to come back to this kind of why do this, right? And I said before, first of all, it provides a sanity check. By comparing granular funnel models against historical actuals and trends, it tends to be pretty obvious where you're basically hoping for a miracle. For example, if the plan shows that you need to double win rate across all channels within 2 quarters in order to achieve goals, that just isn't realistic. Furthermore, by connecting the plan or the funnel models to the related investments, it helps ensure that you actually have the resources at least allocated and budgeted to accomplish what the plan's indicating. Secondly, as Michael showed, by having a plan at this level of detail and a tab or some other mechanism that outlines the assumptions on the levers you can push, it makes it very easy to do sort of what if scenario modeling. And as you get more granular actual data to feed back into these models, the models become a really good reflection of your go-to-market motion that becomes a legitimate tool that leads to better predictability. With this type of plan based on actual historical data, you can actually get to the point where if you put, let's say, X more dollars into paid search, you know exactly or very close how much more bookings you're going to get and when you're going to get it. Or let's say you want to add 2 more SDRs in the next quarter, it will be very clear what the return on that would be and kind of when you would start realizing that return. And finally, by modeling the go-to-market motion at this level of detail and then instrumenting it, your environment, so you can actually measure at the same level of detail, it puts you in a position to much more rapidly understand what's working, what's not, and the root cause, and then take precise and impactful actions. And I want to give you one example of how that works. Let me share my screen for a second.
And while you're doing that, Scott, I'll just add, there's a question from J.Ann in the chat, right? So it's saying that tooling the CRM appropriately requires time investment. And I think that's exactly kind of right up our alley and kind of part of our services offering, right? Is tooling the CRM quickly, precisely to be able to get this data capture to fully enable the full funnel kind of analytics that Scott is showing on the screen.
Yeah, it does require an investment, but it's largely an upfront one-time investment. Also building the plans at this detail, because you don't have to reconstruct the models every year or twice a year. But we've seen it time and again when companies plan at this level and then measure at this level, they do see dramatic gains in efficiency and predictability. And this is an example, right? This is one of our customers, a dashboard where they're looking at all of their funnels by channel, actual versus plan, right? So left-hand side for each of these is the planned funnel, what would have been ingested from those models. Right-hand side is actual performance. You can quickly see kind of where in the overall funnel they're missing. So let's just start at new business. They're, roughly 16% short, right? So that's one thing to know. It's important, and it's mostly they aren't producing enough deals because they are slightly ahead on average deal size. But then you got to drill down and say, okay, well, why are we short, right? And that's what this planning allows you to do. And we can kind of quickly, and I know I'm going through this at lightning speed, but scan through here and we see, for example, the prospecting, AE prospecting, right on target. I mean, effectively on target. But if you look at SDR prospecting, 86% short of target. So immediately we know this is where we need to put some energy. And we can look on this and we see that, yes, the conversion rates are all short, but right out of the get-go, we're down 67% in terms of being able to convert prospecting targets into initial meetings set. So we know that this is where we need to put some energy to try to further dissect, is this systemic? Is this related to certain SDRs or what have you? Similarly, because I had looked at this earlier, I noticed that they were substantially on the marketing side, while, maybe 16% short overall, they were in pretty good shape on organic, right? Only 5% down, but on their ads, their digital ad spend, which was mostly paid search, a little bit of LinkedIn, 35% short. And again, you're able with the plans at this detail to zero in on where in the overall funnel process those holes are, right? So again, the whole point in showing this is to have you better understand how much more rapidly you can diagnose stuff if you are modeling the motions in detail and measuring at the same level of detail. Dan, you want to just put up the last slide, which just has our Michael and my email in case anybody has questions or other stuff that they'd like to follow up with offline. In the meantime, we're happy to stay on here for a few extra minutes. I know we're already 5 minutes over, but if anybody has any other questions that we should respond to.
Yeah, there was one question earlier about whether the Excel sheet that Michael was walking through, the model will be shared, and we can absolutely share that after this call. Michael, hope you don't object to that, but I already committed to it in the chat. Secondly, back to the point about Jan mentioning tooling the CRM requires a certain time investment. Is there any, can you share any expectations for if people want to go down this path of modeling their full funnel and then tracking actuals against the plan? Like how long does it legitimately take?
Well, so at Scale Matters, right, this is what we do for a living. And so I'm not trying to sell anybody, but we have this framework we call Data Drives Action that is very prescriptive in getting the tooling right, so that it basically instrumenting your environment and making sure there's good data hygiene and making sure that you have dashboards, et cetera, that answer key business questions. That process for us, and we typically work in Salesforce environments, right? Because I see a couple of questions, one about HubSpot, one about Pipedrive. I mean, we do most of our work in the Salesforce world because it does allow kind of more rigorous treatment of data and analytics. But when we do that, run through our Data Drives Action process to get that whole thing kind of set up and implemented, it's probably somewhere between 2 and 3 months of work, calendar months, depending on the current state that a customer is in. That's not elapsed or man hours. It's really calendar months. So it probably man hours, 100 hours, 150 hours. And then the modeling, I mean, the first time is the hardest. It probably, to build one of these models, structurally build it right the first time. I don't know, Michael, you and I have both done a number of them. I'm thinking allow a solid week.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
There was a question early on from Ben about how do you identify leading indicators versus lagging revenue metrics. I'm not sure if Michael or Scott, you have any reaction to that, or Ben, if you have any follow-up questions on Michael's answer. But any comment on leading indicators versus lagging revenue metrics?
I think they're still lagging metrics, but they're leading indicators of other metrics, which is that's why we want people planning and measuring at the top of funnel, right? Because while it's an actual performance measurement that you're getting, it's indicative, if you've got your models built properly, it's indicative of what's likely to happen down the road. So you actually have time to react, right? We hear a lot in the industry about wish we were better at forecasting, and most of the companies that focus on forecasting focus on it at the pipeline level, right? Basically in opportunity stages. And the problem is if your forecast tells you something you don't like, it's kind of too late in the overall sales cycle to do a lot about it from a institutional perspective. So we would say get to the equivalent of having leading indicators by putting a lot more energy on understanding what's going on at the top of funnel.
Okay, I just put it in the chat, our next webinar on November 13th, the next one in this series, how to bridge the gap between finance and go-to-market. Really appreciate everyone, your attendance and interaction today on this webinar. We hope you can join us at the next webinar, how to get go-to-market performance reporting on the same playing field as financial reporting. If you have any questions about this presentation or anything that we went over today, please email Scott and Michael. And thank you for your time. Hope you have a great rest of your Wednesday afternoon.
Thank you all.
See you later, everybody.
Thanks,